Howdy guys, this is Dr. Caleb with Incline Performance Therapy. Today I'm going to be talking about acute to chronic workload ratio management in baseball pitchers. And basically, acute to chronic workload ratio is going to equal the total load over the past 7 days. So total load over the past 7 days, and basically this is usually measured in terms of number of pitches that a pitcher will throw. And we're going to compare that number or divide that number by the average of the previous 28 days, the average load over the previous 28 days. And so basically we're getting a comparison of how much have they been throwing, how many throws have they been performing over a month effectively, and then what did they do in the past week that would compare to that prior number, okay? And so we basically can see if they've been tracking at a certain intensity or a certain workload, and we can see if they spiked dramatically or if they dropped dramatically as well, and we can use this number to dictate throwing programs, and we can use it to implement changes in their program to reduce the risk of injury. And we know this because there was a study by a guy named Mehta in 2019, and he showed that if this number, if the acute to chronic workload ratio was within 0.7 to 1.3, that this actually reduced the risk of injury by 15x, right? Which is a huge number in terms of injury reduction potential for these athletes. Now, if you get outside of this range, and most of the time people go above, then you increase the risk of injury by 15x over the course of a season. And we don't want to do that, right? We want to keep our guys healthy. So basically, if you are above 1.3, and we're drawing a graph here, if you can see this, if we're above 1.3, the ramp up period is going to be steep, okay? And if you're below 0.7, basically, actually what that is that's going to be decreasing. So you're going to be decreasing your level of activity over time. So where we want to be, especially at the after an injury, we want to be above 1, which would be here, but we want to be below 1.3. So we kind of want to be tracking in this range so that we know we're making progress, but we're not increasing the risk of injury in that athlete, right? Now, that's after an injury. At the beginning of a season, it's the same thing, right? We want to, we've gone from 0 throwing here basically, and we want to increase. We're not going to go below 0. That's not even, or below 1. It's not even an option at that point. But we also don't want to ramp up too quickly, so we're going to shoot for above 1 but below 1.3. That's what we're shooting for in terms of the workload ratio. Now, how do we manage that during a season? Okay, so over the course of a season, it actually becomes pretty important, especially for starting pitchers. This is why at the beginning of the season in the bigs, for example, you don't see guys coming out and throwing 100 plus pitches at the beginning of the season, because that would be too quick of a ramp up. We want a little bit lower, ramp up, so that they can have a long and healthy season, okay? Again, if we go faster than 1.3, then we're increasing the risk of injury. And how we do this at Incline with our guys who are on our maintenance programs is we measure the number of total throws that they'll perform. A lot of programs will only measure the number of pitches that a pitcher will perform in a game situation or in a scrimmage. But what we'll measure is we measure the number of warm-up throws. We measure the number of what we call work throws, which are basically plyo ball throws, bullpens, PFPs. And then we measure the number of pitches. And we actually attach a certain weight to each of those types of throws so that we can calculate how much stress has actually been put on the arm. And it's a little bit more detailed than only counting the number of pitches that you throw in a game. And what this helps us do is it helps us identify a true workload over the course of a season so that we can better monitor and reduce the risk of injury. An example of when I've had to use this to kind of affect a player's training is I actually had a college kid come in a few weeks ago, and he had just thrown 103 pitches in his weekend start, and this was about 20 more pitches than any of his other starts throughout the course of the season. And so he was sore. we took some internal rotation and external rotation strength measurements, and those were down. And then his ACWR, his acute to chronic workload ratio, came out to 1.44, which is higher than our 1.3. So what we did is we actually reduced the number of pitches that he threw in his bullpen that week. His arm got back to a good spot, and he had another 100-plus pitch outing that next week, and then he had a great start. So this is a functional way that we actually used this number to titrate the number of pitches during the week so that he can perform well on the weekend. Again, the whole point of this is so that you perform well in the game. It's not necessarily to limit your game time play, it's to enhance it over the course of the season and to keep you healthy. So all that being said, this is something that we heavily monitor now in our baseball maintenance programs. We have guys take logs of all the types of pitches that they throw, and then we give feedback based on these numbers, and including other strength metrics that we take and range of motion movements. And based on all that information, we help these guys stay healthy throughout their career. If you want to know more about how we keep athletes healthy throughout their season and career, just click in the link in the description.